What would you say was the biggest challenge you faced during your tenure?
Well, it was dealing with the problem that I've just described. A second problem I had was that I had been appointed by President George Herbert Walker Bush, a Republican, and President Clinton, a Democrat, decided to keep me on as ambassador. In fact, I'm the only American ambassador to China that has served under both a Democratic and a Republican administration.
Oh, wow.
Uh, Fortunately, the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia in the Clinton administration had been the ambassador in China when I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary handling China in Washington. And I had given him superb support, and he was grateful for that. And he gave me superb support in Beijing. But the Clinton administration came in with a decision to use human rights as the lens for dealing with China. And the first major démarche that I had to carry out in Beijing was the linking of human rights to most favored nation treatment for China. And that was a very difficult démarche to carry out. First of all, I thought that the linkage was not the right way to handle the problem. But as the representative of the Clinton administration, I had to make it work. And the question was, how do you make that presentation without getting thrown out of the office? But I was able to get over that hurdle. And in fact, the Chinese agreed to address all of the 7 areas where we wanted improvements in human rights. And my strategy was to see if we could get some progress in each of the areas. And then we would argue with Washington whether we could call it fundamental progress. Because what we were demanding was fundamental improvements in 7 areas of human rights in 1 year, which is absurd on the face of it, but nevertheless, that's what they wanted. Well, the Chinese agreed to talk. But then the problem was with Washington, because I could not get instructions from Washington on what we would do if the Chinese were prepared to do certain things in the particular areas of human rights we were concerned about. Well, you can't negotiate if you can't convey to the other side what they will get if they do what you want them to do. And that continued for 9 months. And I had 1 year in which to try to wrap up these negotiations, and I couldn't get instructions that were usable with the Chinese side. So it was a very frustrating period, and I was dealing with a new administration, and I had known all the top officials in the Bush administration. I only knew some of them in the Clinton administration, and so I had to walk carefully. And one of the notable things during the first year of the Clinton administration was that the situation in China had turned around after the Tiananmen events. The Tiananmen events had enabled conservatives in China to essentially halt the reform and openness policies that Deng Xiaoping had started. And China had reverted to a much more closed system. But after the 14th Party Congress in the fall of 1992, the last year of the Bush administration, they had thrown out the conservatives and had gone back heavily to reform and openness policies. And the American business community immediately noticed that. And so during 1993, CEOs of big American companies were flocking into China. And because of concerns about the political relationship, they all met with me. And they were all stunned to find when they came to China that the situation was more favorable than it was being reported in the United States. And I discovered that American tourists were reacting the same way, and that American China specialists who came to China were also surprised to find that after Tiananmen, China had recovered and was much more open and outward looking than it was being reported in the United States. So at the end of 1993, I gave an interview to the New York Times in which I did not defend China's human rights practices, which were still unsatisfactory from an American standpoint. But I did talk about the improvements in China in terms of standard of living, in terms of economic development, in terms of freedom of movement, etc. And New York Times carried it on the front page, and I ran us into a firestorm of criticism from Washington. The administration was upset, and Congress was upset that I had talked this way. And it looked like I might be withdrawn. And that's where the assistant secretary proved helpful. Because I talked to him and I said, if Washington wasn't prepared to back me up on this, they had the transcript of my interview. I had defended our human rights approach. But I had also spoken accurately about what the situation in China was. And if they weren't prepared to back me up, I said they should take me out. And within 3 hours, Washington issued a statement expressing confidence in me. And that is thanks to the assistant secretary who orchestrated that. The interesting thing about that episode is I privately received 3 letters from cabinet members of the Clinton administration praising me for having spoken out the way I did. In other words, they recognized that the way that we were dealing with China and the United States was distorting the reality of what was actually happening in China. So those are the types of problems that I ran into as ambassador in China. But generally, I found that while you couldn't move easily from here to there, if you approached it gradually, that you could make progress in the right direction. And in fact, that's what took place.